The sterile, antiseptic scent of the hospital room faded into the background, replaced by the warm, sweet smell of my newborn son, Leo. Cradled in my arms, he was a tiny, perfect miracle, and my heart ached with a love so fierce it brought tears to my eyes. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. The click of the door opening pulled me from my reverie. My husband, Ryan, stood in the doorway, but the joyful smile I'd been waiting for was nowhere to be seen. Beside him stood his mother, Eleanor, her lips a thin, disapproving line, her eyes like chips of ice. Their gazes didn't fall on me with love, but on the baby with cold assessment. Ryan's handsome face, the one I had fallen for, twisted into a sneer of disgust. He pointed a trembling finger at the birth certificate on the bedside table. "I won't be signing that," he spat, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. "Because he is not mine," Eleanor added, her voice dripping with venom. "I always knew you weren't good enough for our family." A sob tore from my throat as shame and confusion crashed over me. The world dissolved into the image of my own tear-streaked face reflected in the window. Just as Ryan and his mother turned to leave me shattered, a calm, firm voice cut through the air. "Mr. Russell," said Dr. Evans, stepping between them and the door. "Before you go, there's a medical anomaly in your son's blood work we need to discuss. A rare genetic marker, one that makes this situation biologically impossible." The door slammed shut, and the silence that followed was heavier than any sound. Dr. Evans's words, biologically impossible, were a life raft in a sea of confusion, but Ryan and his mother had already sailed away, leaving me to drown in their wake. Their venom lingered in the sterile air, poisoning the sacred space where I had just brought my son into the world. I clutched Leo tighter, his tiny, rhythmic breaths the only real thing in a world that had just been torn apart. The next day, a nurse informed me with practiced sympathy that I was being discharged. My calls to Ryan went straight to a cold, unfamiliar voicemail message. He had blocked my number. Panic began to claw at my throat. When I tried to pay for a taxi with the credit card Ryan had always insisted I use for emergencies, the driver's machine beeped 3 times. Declined. My face burned with a shame so hot it eclipsed my grief. I fumbled in my purse, pulling out the meager cash I had, barely enough to cover the fare. The taxi dropped me at the curb of what was supposed to be our home, the beautiful house we had painstakingly decorated for our new family. With Leo nestled against my chest, I walked up the stone path, a hollow ache spreading through me. My key slid into the lock but wouldn't turn. I tried again, my hand trembling, jiggling it uselessly. Then I saw it. The cold, new glint of brass where the familiar silver lock had been. He had changed the locks. I was homeless. With nowhere else to go and my cash dwindling, I found a room at the Sunburst Motel, a place whose cheerful name was a cruel joke. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and harsh disinfectant. A single flickering bulb cast long, dancing shadows on the stained carpet. I laid Leo down on the thin, scratchy blanket of the bed, his peaceful, sleeping face a stark contrast to the ugliness surrounding us. The neon sign outside pulsed red against the grimy window, bathing the room in a sickly light. The silence here was different. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the absence of love, of hope, of everything I had ever known. It was the sound of being utterly and completely alone. The days in the motel blurred into a desolate rhythm, marked only by the rising and setting of a sun I couldn't see past the grime on the window. My world had shrunk to the 4 peeling walls of this room, the constant hum of the mini-fridge, and the tiny, precious weight of Leo in my arms. He was my only anchor. Then the rhythm broke. It started subtly. His cry, once a demanding wail, had become a pitiful, breathy whimper. He'd barely woken for his last 2 feedings, his little mouth turning away from the bottle. I told myself he was just a sleepy baby, that I was just a paranoid new mother. But then, as I was changing his diaper, I saw it. A small, purplish mark on his impossibly small thigh, like a faded ink stain under his translucent skin. My breath caught. I ran my fingers over his other leg and found another, then a faint one on his delicate arm. They weren't bumps or scrapes. How could they be? He did nothing but sleep and eat and be held. A cold dread, sharp and metallic, flooded my veins. This was wrong. terribly wrong. My hands shook as I wrapped him in his only clean blanket. With the last of my cash tucked into my pocket, I ran out of the motel and down the street to a low-cost community clinic I had seen earlier. The waiting room was crowded and smelled of anxiety and illness. I clutched Leo to my chest, my own heartbeat a frantic drum against his too-still body. After what felt like an eternity, we were called back. A young, tired-looking doctor entered, his smile fading as he took in Leo's listless form. He gently unwrapped the blanket, his professional demeanor tightening as he saw the bruises. He pressed his fingers lightly against Leo's skin, his brow furrowed in concentration. "How long has he been this lethargic?" he asked, his voice low and serious. I could barely speak. "A day, maybe 2. The bruises, I just saw them this morning." The doctor looked me straight in the eyes, his own filled with a gravity that made my stomach plummet. "I don't want to alarm you, Mrs. Russell, but these aren't typical bruises. They're called petechiae. Combined with his lethargy, it's a significant cause for concern." He pulled out a prescription pad, but instead of writing a prescription, he scribbled a list. "We need to run a full blood panel, immediately. We need to check his platelet counts, his white cells, everything." My relief that someone was taking me seriously was instantly crushed by his next question. "What's your insurance situation?" The words caught in my throat. When I finally shook my head, his face fell. He looked at the paper, then back at me. "These tests, they are extensive, and they are very, very expensive." Back in the suffocating stillness of the motel room, the doctor's words echoed in my head. Extensive. Expensive. I looked at Leo, sleeping in the center of the sagging bed, his small chest barely rising and falling. His life depended on tests I couldn't afford. A wave of frantic energy surged through me. I had to have something of value. Something. I tore through my hospital bag, tossing aside baby clothes and nursing pads. Nothing. My purse yielded only a few crumpled dollar bills and some loose change. My eyes landed on a small, scuffed cardboard box in the corner. My memory box. I'd kept it in the trunk of my car for years, a collection of sentimental treasures. Now, sentiment was a luxury I couldn't afford. My wedding ring was already gone, sold for formula and a week's rent. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Old concert tickets, dried flowers from my first date with Ryan, letters he'd written me. Each item was a fresh stab to my already wounded heart. At the bottom, under a bundle of letters, was a small stack of faded Polaroids. I sifted through them, my vision blurring with tears. Then I stopped. One photo felt thick, wrong. It was 2 pictures stuck together. I carefully peeled them apart. The top one was of me and Ryan at a beach bonfire, smiling. The one underneath made my breath catch in my throat. It was a picture of 2 young boys, maybe 10 years old, standing in a sunny backyard. They wore matching striped shirts, their arms slung around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera with identical, gap-toothed smiles. One of them was undeniably, unmistakably Ryan. The other was also Ryan. They weren't just similar, they were mirrors, down to the freckle beside the left eye. My mind raced. A twin? Ryan had never mentioned a twin. He was an only child. I knew his entire life story, or so I had thought. Swallowing my pride, my fingers shaking so badly I could barely dial, I called the only number I could think of. Eleanor answered on the second ring, her voice like shattering glass. "What do you want?" I found a picture," I stammered, my voice small. "Of Ryan, with a boy who looks just like him. A twin." The silence on the other end was cold and absolute. Then a sharp, dismissive sigh. "That was his cousin, Thomas. He passed away. A tragic accident when they were children." She spoke the words with a chilling finality, daring me to question them. "But they're identical," I whispered. "How could a cousin—" "I have nothing more to say to you." The line went dead. I stared at the photograph, the 2 smiling faces mocking me. Eleanor's lie hung in the stale motel air. Thin and transparent. A tragic accident. An impossible genetic marker. A brother I never knew existed. The fear for my son was now tangled with a new, terrifying dread. This wasn't a story of infidelity. It was something else entirely. The flimsy hope I'd clung to felt like a cruel joke. I had sold the last of my sentimental trinkets, the gold locket from my grandmother, for just enough money to get me and Leo back to the main hospital. Not the clinic. I needed to see Dr. Evans. He was the one who had planted the seed of this mystery, the one who had looked Ryan in the eye and said the word impossible. I found him walking the corridor, his face etched with concern as he reviewed a chart. When he saw me, hollow-eyed and clutching my sleeping son, his expression softened with pity. He ushered us into a small, empty office. He already had the results from the clinic. "Crystal," he began, his voice gentle but firm, "Leo has a severe form of aplastic anemia. It's a rare disorder where his bone marrow isn't producing enough new blood cells. The lethargy, the bruising, it's because his body can't fight infection or clot properly." The clinical words washed over me, a wave of cold I felt deep in my bones. I could only manage a single whispered word. What does that mean?" Dr. Evans took a deep breath. "It's life-threatening. He needs a bone marrow transplant. And soon." He paused, his gaze heavy with meaning. "The best chance for a match is a direct biological relative, a parent or a sibling." The room began to spin. A father who denied him, a family who had locked me out, and a ghost in a photograph. My legs gave out from under me, and I sank into the visitor's chair, a dry, ragged sob escaping my lips. My son was dying, and his cure was locked away in a secret I couldn't unravel. After leaving the office, a shattered mess, I stumbled into a quiet alcove in the hallway, trying to breathe. The photograph slipped from my trembling fingers and fluttered to the floor. As I bent to retrieve it, a gentle hand picked it up for me. "I saw you in the maternity ward a few weeks ago," a soft voice said. I looked up into the kind eyes of a nurse, her name tag reading Chloe. "I saw what your husband did. I am so sorry." Tears streamed down my face, hot and unstoppable. "It's not just that," I choked out, gesturing to the photo in her hand. "My son, he's dying. He needs a transplant from a relative, but my husband, he isn't a match. He can't be. But the doctor said it has to be his family, and his mother told me this boy, his cousin, died." Chloe stared at the picture of the two identical boys, her brow furrowed. She looked from the photo to my tear-streaked face, a flicker of fierce decision in her eyes. She handed the picture back to me, her fingers closing over mine for a second. "Aplastic anemia is sometimes hereditary," she said quietly, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "And identical twins have the exact same DNA." She gave my hand a firm squeeze. "Your mother-in-law is lying, and I'm going to help you find out why." Chloe was a woman of quiet, determined action. That evening, after her shift ended, she led me not to an office, but down to the hospital's basement. The air grew cool and musty, thick with the scent of old paper and dust. We passed silent, cavernous laundry rooms and humming boiler units until we reached a locked door labeled Archives. Chloe swiped her ID badge, and the lock clicked open. "The hospital has a subscription to most major state newspaper archives going back 100 years, she explained, flicking on a fluorescent light that sputtered to life overhead. "It's all on microfiche." She led me to a clunky, beige machine in the corner. Leo was asleep in his carrier at my feet, a constant, fragile reminder of our ticking clock. I watched, my heart pounding, as Chloe threaded a spool of film into the reader. She typed Russell and a range of years into the search index. The machine whirred, and a stream of flickering green text scrolled across the screen. Society galas, business mergers, charity events. The public face of the Russell dynasty. It felt like searching for a ghost in a fortress. "Wait," Chloe whispered, her body tensing. She zoomed in on a small article from a local paper dated 20 years ago. The headline jumped out in stark, blocky letters. "Tragedy at Russell Estate. Son 10, drowns in private lake." My blood ran cold. So Eleanor had been telling the truth. A wave of despair washed over me. It was a dead end. "Don't," Chloe said, sensing my deflation. She pointed a finger at the screen. Read the details. I leaned in, my eyes scanning the grainy text. The article named the boy as Mark Russell, the twin brother of Ryan. It described a terrible accident during a family gathering. But as I read on, the hair on my arms began to stand up. The entire report was based on a single statement given by the family's lawyer. There were no quotes from police, no eyewitness accounts outside the family. The search was reportedly called off after only a few hours at the family's request. Then Chloe pointed to the last paragraph. Here, this is it. The Russell family has requested privacy during this difficult time. A private service will be held. In a departure from standard procedure, the coroner's office did not release a report to the press, and no public viewing of the body was conducted. No body, I breathed, the words catching in my throat. I looked from the screen to Chloe, whose eyes were wide with grim confirmation. They never found a body, or they never let anyone see it. The lie had a name now, Mark, and it wasn't the story of a tragic accident. It was the story of a cover-up. He hadn't drowned. He had been made to disappear. The knowledge of the lie settled in my gut like a stone. Mark was alive. He had to be. But where would a powerful family hide a person they wanted the world to believe was dead? We were back in the stale air of my motel room, the microfiche article a blurry photo on Chloe's phone. Leo slept fitfully in my arms, his skin paler than it should be, a constant, silent pressure on my heart. Think, Crystal, Chloe said, her voice gentle but insistent. Ryan never mentioned anything? A place he went to be alone? Anywhere odd? I shook my head, my mind a fog of grief and exhaustion. No, he was always so busy with work, business trips, conferences. I trailed off, a memory flickering at the edge of my consciousness. Wait, there was something. I remembered my confusion over his solo hiking trips. Ryan, my husband who considered a walk to the mailbox a chore, would suddenly announce he needed to get away from it all and disappear for a weekend. He'd come back smelling of pine and wood smoke, his expensive hiking boots suspiciously clean. He never had pictures. He was always vague about the locations. Upstate, the mountains. At the time, I'd worried he was having an affair. Now, a more sinister possibility bloomed. He said he went hiking, I told Chloe, the words tumbling out. But it never made sense. He hated the outdoors. Chloe's eyes lit up. Where did he say he went? He was always vague, the Adirondacks, the Catskills. But he always came back through one particular town. He mentioned stopping at a little diner there, a place called the North Star. Chloe immediately pulled out her laptop. While I rocked Leo, a knot of dread and anticipation tightening in my chest, she cross-referenced the town with public property records. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. After 10 minutes of tense silence, she gasped. Got it, she whispered, turning the laptop towards me. A holding company, North Star Properties LLC, owns a single, isolated parcel of land about 20 miles outside that town. It's 100 acres of dense woodland. Is it connected to the Russells? I asked, my voice trembling. Chloe's expression was grim. The LLC was established 20 years ago, 2 weeks after the date on that newspaper article, and the sole signatory on the company's incorporation documents is Eleanor Russell. She then pulled up a satellite image. In the middle of an unbroken sea of green was a tiny gray square, a cabin, isolated, inaccessible. A perfect place to hide someone. Chloe did one last search, this time through online grocery delivery services that operated in the area. A local supermarket had a recurring weekly order, groceries, supplies, toiletries, delivered to a lockbox at the edge of the service road leading to that exact property. The order was paid for by a credit card linked to the North Star Properties account. The truth was no longer a question. It was a destination. Mark was there. And one of them, the man I married or the brother he pretended was dead, was the father of my dying child. The drive upstate was a blur of green foliage and a gray, unforgiving sky. Chloe had insisted on coming with me, leaving Leo in the care of her trusted, retired mother, a former pediatric nurse. Every mile that separated me from my son felt like a physical tear in my soul, but this was the only way. The borrowed car rattled over the final stretch of gravel road, deep in the heart of the woods, until we saw it. A small, rustic cabin, smoke curling lazily from its stone chimney. It looked almost peaceful. My heart hammered against my ribs as I stepped out of the car. Chloe stayed behind, her hand on her phone, ready. I walked up the worn wooden steps and knocked. The door creaked open, and there he was. Ryan. He was dressed in a simple flannel shirt, a book in his hand. He looked surprised to see me, but his smile was warm, familiar. It was the smile that had made me fall in love. "Crystal, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice full of the concern I had been so desperate to hear. For a heart-stopping moment, I faltered. This was my husband. I had made a terrible mistake. But then I saw his hiking boots by the door, caked in real mud, and I remembered the lie. "We need to talk, Ryan," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "About Leo. About your brother." His smile didn't falter, but something shifted in his eyes, a flicker of cold amusement. He stepped aside, gesturing for me to enter. The cabin was sparse, tidy, a man's solitary life. "My brother," he chuckled, closing the door behind me. "Crystal, we've been over this. Thomas drowned." "His name was Mark," I shot back, turning to face him. "And he didn't drown. He's you. You're him. I don't know which one you are, but one of you fathered my son, and he is dying." The silence stretched, thick and heavy. He stared at me, and then, slowly, terrifyingly, his face began to change. The warm, loving mask of Ryan melted away, and the smile that replaced it was all sharp edges and cruel satisfaction. It was a predator's smile. "Took you long enough," he said, his voice a low, mocking drawl that was nothing like Ryan's. "It's Mark, by the way. A pleasure to finally meet you properly." My blood ran cold. "What did you do?" He laughed, a chilling, ugly sound. "What our mother let me do, what Ryan let me do. He got the success, the money, the perfect life. I got this cage. So sometimes we'd switch. He'd come here for a break, and I'd go out and play. I'd borrow his suits, his car, his wife." He took a step closer, his eyes gleaming with a manic pride. "Mother faked my death to hide my impulses. She thought it would be better this way, a perfect son for the world to see, and her little monster tucked safely away." But monsters get bored. Mark's confession hung in the air, a monstrous truth that sucked all the oxygen from the room. He was enjoying this, savoring the horror on my face. He took another step toward me, and I backed away, my hand fumbling behind me for the doorknob. "You're pathetic, just like him," Mark sneered. "Too weak to see what was right in front of you. He couldn't handle the pressure of his own perfect life, so he'd come here to hide, and I'd go out and live it for him." Suddenly, the heavy cabin door flew open, banging against the interior wall. I spun around to see a man standing on the porch, his face a mirror image of the monster before me, but his eyes were wide with disbelief and dawning horror. He was dressed in a crisp polo shirt and slacks, looking completely out of place in the rustic setting. It was Ryan. The real Ryan. "Crystal?" he breathed, his voice raw with confusion. Then his eyes landed on Mark, and his face went white. "What is this? What have you done?" Chloe stood behind him on the path, her phone still pressed to her ear. She had done more than wait. She had found him. She'd tracked his phone to a luxury wellness retreat an hour away, the place his mother sent him to decompress while Mark was out of his cage. Mark's predatory grin widened. "Hello, brother. Looks like your little getaway is over. Your wife and I were just getting acquainted." The words hit Ryan like a physical blow. He stared at me, then at Mark, the pieces of a lifetime of lies clicking into place with audible, shattering force. The hospital, my accusations, his mother's evasiveness, it all coalesced into one hideous truth. "You were with her?" Ryan's voice was a choked whisper. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "The night before my trip, I left you at home. I told Mother you were feeling sick." "And she told me," Mark cut in, his voice laced with triumph. "She called me. Said you were weak, stressed, said it was my turn to play." The betrayal was too much. With a guttural roar of pure animal rage, Ryan launched himself at his brother. The two identical men crashed into a table, sending books and papers flying. It wasn't a fight. It was an explosion of pent-up fury and decades of deception. Fists flew, connecting with sickening thuds. They were a whirlwind of identical faces twisted into masks of hate, one defending a life that was a lie, the other avenging it. I could only stand by the door, paralyzed, as the man I married fought the monster who had stolen his face. The violent eruption ended as quickly as it began. Police, summoned by Chloe before we had even arrived, swarmed the cabin. They pulled the brothers apart. Mark, bleeding from his lip but smiling with a chilling, vacant satisfaction, was led away in handcuffs, his laughter echoing through the silent woods. Ryan, bruised and trembling, simply collapsed onto his knees on the porch, his face buried in his hands, his sobs the ragged, broken sound of a man whose entire world had been a lie. The days that followed were a whirlwind of hospitals and legal procedures. Ryan, consumed by a guilt so profound it was etched onto every feature of his face, immediately volunteered to be tested. He was, as Dr. Evans and Chloe had suspected, a perfect genetic match for Leo. He was his brother's keeper, and now he would be my son's savior. I watched the transplant through a pane of glass, my heart a painful knot in my chest. I saw Ryan, pale and still on his bed, giving a part of himself to undo a fraction of the damage. And I saw Leo, my tiny, fragile boy, receiving the gift of life that had been born from so much pain and deceit. The surgery was a success. Color returned to Leo's cheeks, and the light returned to his eyes. He was going to live. Months later, the autumn leaves were turning brilliant shades of orange and red. The world felt new, washed clean. I sat at a large mahogany table in a lawyer's office, the scent of lemon polish and old books in the air. The divorce papers were spread out before me. Ryan sat opposite, his face gaunt but his eyes clear. He didn't contest anything. He had already signed over a significant portion of the Russell fortune to a trust for Leo, an apology written in dollars and cents. I picked up the pen, and with a steady hand I signed my name, severing the final tie to the Russell family and their suffocating secrets. The last stop of the day was a sterile government office. I filled out the paperwork with a sense of quiet purpose. An hour later, I walked out into the crisp afternoon air, the sun warm on my face. In my hands, I held a fresh, new document. It read, Certificate of Live Birth. Name, Leo Russell. In the space for the father's name, where Ryan's had once been, was a simple, clean, empty line. I ran my thumb over the blank space. Leo's life was not defined by the men who shared his DNA, not the monster who created him, nor the broken man who saved him. His life would be defined by the love I held for him. I held the certificate to my chest, took a deep breath of the free air, and walked away to start our new life, a family of two, whole and complete on our own.